There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Shoff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
This is What in the World is Going On. I am your host, Richard Shoff. We are sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes, and we are pro-Christian, pro-American, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and here only by the grace of God. For those of you that have an interest in a log home, give me a call at 800-848-3310. I personally will work with you, answer your questions, and get you the best pricing there is around. We're going to continue with what we had on our last broadcast. Pretty much a summary of America is at a crossroads. And as we look at America at the crossroads, we're going to be looking at a lot of Democrats. These aren't the Democrats that people of my generation had earlier in their life. I'm a little older than some of you. But many of you will remember Senator Hubert Humphrey from Minnesota. He was a great patriot, liberal as heck, vice president from 65 through 69 under Lyndon Johnson. But he was American at heart. Remember Scoop Jackson, Senator Jackson out in Washington State? Didn't agree with him on much, but sure agreed with him on national defense and strong borders. He was an American at heart. And you remember Tip O'Neill? He was the leader of the House of Representatives under President Reagan. Very liberal, Irish, American. Very liberal, folks, but a good American. And you know, two men that I had met personally were once Democrats, President Ronald Reagan, Senator Jesse Helms. I have never known men of their stature, their love for God and country. None like them. But that's not where the Democrat Party is today. Just this past week, we had a case, a woman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She ran as a Democrat socialist with a 21st century vision. She's a 28-year-old grassroots activist. She just pulled off what many are claiming is the biggest upset so far in the 2018 election cycle. Her Democrat primary winner, she was a winner over Congressman Joe Crowley. He was a veteran party operative, 10-term incumbent, liberal, but fourth-ranking Democrat in the House many thought would take over Nancy Pelosi's seat if the Democrats took over the House again. Even the New York Times was stunned at this, the most significant loss for a Democrat incumbent in years, and one that they said will reverberate across the country. She won 57.5% to 42.5%, despite the fact that Crowley overwhelmingly outspent her and enjoyed the support from the same top-ranking Democrats who are lining up behind New York Governor Andrew Cuomo in his September Democrat primary contest with Cynthia Nixon. Cynthia Nixon was backed by Ocasio-Cortez and hailed Tuesday's win as, quote, what happens when you give people a choice. They show up and they reject the status quo, end quote. Matt Blizek, the elections mobilizing director of Move On, extended on the theme, saying the results are also shot across the bow of the Democratic establishment in Washington. The success of this young working-class Latina, who served as an organizer for Bernie Sanders in the 2016 presidential race, illustrates the volatility that exists within a Democratic Party. We're always naming what we wanted to accomplish, she said. Her primary victory in an overwhelmingly Democrat district all but assures that she will secure the seat in November. That's right, she is going to be in our U.S. House of Representatives come January. She was warm and open as a candidate. She showed up for debates that Crowley skipped in the Bronx-Queens neighborhood. That's New York's 14th district. She pulled no punches when it came to the issues. She's a Bronx native who celebrated her own Puerto Rican heritage. She's also promised to carry a fight for sweeping change in the way that the United States relates to Puerto Rico on a host of economic and infrastructure issues. In a multiracial, multi-ethnic district with a large immigrant population, she made the fight against the Trump administration policy central to her campaigning. This while she highlighted a call for the abolition. Now listen to this, folks. She wants to get rid of the Immigration and Customs Agency. That's ICE. She's championed single-payer Medicare for all. That type of health care system, all paid for. She's declared for free housing. She says it's a right. And she's called for sweeping criminal justice reform. She's identified as a proud member of the Democrat Socialists of America. She wants a national guaranteed wage for everybody. Free college for everybody. Wow, folks. She's an extremist. But since she came out so strong, listen to this. She's been joined by Jill Gillibrand. That's a junior senator from New York. She says the same thing. Let's get rid of ICE. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, he wants to get rid of ICE and border control. California Junior Senator Harris, same thing. Get rid of ICE. Sanctuary cities throughout the United States. And she's thinking about announcing to run for president come 2020. Well, folks, where does that leave us? This isn't the Democratic Party of your daddies and your granddaddies. But what's happening now? Well, the left has lost its cool. When you're violent and cursing and screaming and blocking me from walking into a movie, there's something wrong with that, said one top GOP official. 2 senior Trump administration officials were heckled at restaurants. A third was denied service. That was Florida's GOP Attorney General Pam Bondi. She required a police escort away from a movie about Mr. Rogers. Also, 2 other Republican lawmakers say they were also politically harassed last week, one of them with their kids in tow. This is part of a trend, Attorney General Bondi said. She's a close ally of Trump's. She came face-to-face with protesters last Friday at that theater in Tampa, Florida. When you're violent and cursing and screaming and blocking me from walking into a movie, there's something wrong, she said. The next people are going to come with guns. That's what's going to happen, she predicted. This from the Attorney General of the state of Florida. What else is going on, folks? Well, Steve King, he's that congressman from Iowa, 8 terms. He posted a warning on Twitter last Sunday, a week ago, that the U.S. is heading toward a second civil war, comparing the present-day actions of the anti-Trump resistance to the run-up to our last civil war. He keyed through PJ Media article about leftist protesters shutting down a Portland, Oregon ICE office and taking down the U.S. flag, replacing it, folks, listen to this, with a refugee welcoming flag. That in place of Old Glory on top of the ICE building. He predicts America's heading in the direction of another Harper's Ferry. After that, he said, comes Fort Sumter. A little additional information on what happened to Sarah Sanders. We talked about it last week. The owner of that restaurant in Virginia who asked her to leave, and she did, well, she followed her across the street, or her family across the street. Now, Sarah Sanders and her husband went home. They'd had enough of it. They just went home. But her family, his family, went to another restaurant across the street. The owner of the one that threw them all out followed them across the street, called people and organized a protest, yelling and screaming at them outside the other restaurant and creating a scene. And what was this over, folks? It wasn't over immigration. It wasn't over kids being separated from their parents. She was upset because Sarah Sanders worked for Donald Trump and that administration, and Donald Trump had called for an end of transvestites serving in our military. Wow. Facing a new wave of potentially dangerous threats called for by a top Democrat lawmaker, legal and gun experts are calling on Trump aides to get their concealed permit and back it up with a pistol. There's simply not enough police in D.C. or Virginia or Maryland to protect all of the Trump officials at their homes and when they go out to restaurants. Getting a concealed handgun permit would be helpful to protect themselves and their family. Quote from John Lott. Who's he? He's head of the Crime Prevention Research Center. High level officials in the Trump administration, especially if their faces are likely to be recognized by many in the public as a result of appearances on TV, might want to consider applying for that license to carry a concealed weapon in the District of Columbia and other states they frequent. This in view of the call by U.S. Representative Maxine Waters for the public to, quote, absolutely harass those officials in public places and other recent events indicating the increased danger that they're in. This according to public interest law professor John Banziff. Comments on U.S. Maxine Waters. She's been around a while. She was the one that wanted us to cut off aid to the Contras back in the Reagan era. She's been a long-time friend of the liberal lefties. She's from California, of course. Waters over the weekend told her legion of followers to confront Trump aides wherever they were. Quoting her, she said, if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and create a crowd and you push back on them and tell them that they're not welcome anymore anywhere. She said this a week ago Saturday night in Los Angeles. And you know, those leftist thugs, they guarantee another Scalise tragedy. Someone's going to get killed. We've gone, this article came to me, writing from Daniel Savitsky, and he notes, somebody's going to get killed. We've gone beyond the severed presidential head scalp by an unfunny and untalented Kathy Griffin. We've gone to mob violence, including the physical harassment of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. She was drummed out of that Mexican restaurant, by left-wing activists. She was protesting the immigration stand. She was also targeted by a leftist mob at her home. And a bunch of protesters gathered outside her home, blasting audio of crying immigrant children and crying, "No justice, no sleep." The small crowd of about 24 protesters was led by Credo Action. That's a progressive grassroots organization. They posted to social media where they were showing protesters repeatedly yelling, "Shame," as she left her home with it, entered her vehicle. "History will remember you," shouted one protester with a British accent. "You belong in The Hague. You are a modern-day Nazi." In the days of civil discourse, ideological opponents would target each other and their rhetoric, but not each other personally. Now, following Saul Alinsky's playbook, it's not what conservatives stand for that's evil, it's against conservatives themselves. They look at us all as evil. And we've got to be thrown out of restaurants. We've got to be confronted at our homes, and yes, shot on baseball practice fields, like we have been already. And MSNBC, Joanne Reed, well, she's an appalling example of the less pathological hatred of anything and anyone conservative. She said in not so many words that Representative Steve Scalise kind of had it coming when a Bernie Sanders volunteer tried to assassinate him and his GOP colleagues as they practiced for their annual baseball game a year ago. That was a game between Democrats and Republicans in Congress. She just wanted to assassinate him. Her litany of Scalise's crimes against humanity for which he deserved being a target for assassination reveal how skewered to the left is the moral compass of those on the left. You see, she said he had co-sponsored a bill to amend the Constitution to define marriage as between a man and a woman. Boy, that's a bad representative to have, isn't it? Scalise also voted for a House health care bill that she said would have gutted health care for millions of people, including 3 million children, and he co-sponsored a bill to repeal a ban on automatic weapons. She believed this justified his assassination, apparently. This is Representative Waters of California. A week ago Saturday night, she encouraged the type of recent protest against President Trump as seen in several Washington, D.C. and Virginia area restaurants, saying, quote, "I have no sympathy for those who serve in this administration, and that the public should turn on them and absolutely harass them." I didn't quote on Maxine Waters. White House officials are only doing their normal daily activities, and this is where she would attack them. Representative Waters then went further, adding that members of the Trump administration who continue to serve and defend the president should be harassed at gas stations, restaurants, while shopping at department stores. They know what they're doing is wrong, she screamed, and for that the public should ridicule them and protest them. We should get rid of them. Just as in the case of Steve Scalise. Those on the left are suggesting that Sarah Sanders, Kirstjen Nielsen, and even young Barron Trump deserved any confrontation that's directed at them. Their hateful end justifies the means. She said that will likely inspire someone like the loon who shot up an American baseball field to take similar action. After all, if you believe in securing the border, enforcing the nation's laws, you have it coming. This from a U.S. representative, many terms now coming front and center. The public hearing of shaming of high-level, widely known Trump administrations has expanded to giving out of their personal information about the rank-and-file government employees who are carrying out Trump's least popular policies. Twice in the last week, activists have posted information on employees of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That's ICE, folks. Sam Levine, a professor at New York University, last Tuesday posted data of 1,595 ICE employees that he scraped off profiles of LinkedIn Inc., a career networking platform. He posted this on GitHub. I leave it here with the hope that researchers, journalists, and activists will find it useful, he wrote in a blog posting on Medium. What he did here, let me describe this. He took their personal information. He took their telephone numbers, where they lived, where they were working out of, the ICE employees, and put it on social media for all to know. WikiLeaks, a radical transparency group that's published millions of documents over the past decade, a week ago Friday posted what it called ICE Patrol, a website with biographical information on 9,243 people that it said were employees of ICE or linked to the agency. In other words, they're going after the employees of ICE as they're going after, in street protests, the even existing of the ICE program. And incidentally, folks, ICE is credited with maintaining our borders to the extent that they're being maintained. They're on the front lines. And these people don't want to just get rid of the Border Patrol. They want to get rid of ICE. Splinter, an English language news and opinion website owned by Univision Communications, huge Spanish language media company. They've put out this information, made it public. They have put it out. Steve Miller's personal cell phone. Who's Steve Miller? Steve Miller, he is with the Trump administration, a senior advisor to Trump on immigration policy, an architect of the zero tolerance. They put his telephone number out so that all the terrorists could find it. Well, as the nation's divisions deepen, one expert said that a growing segment of the public has come to accept public shaming as tolerable, if not unreasonable. These are just a few of the things that are going on right now. Hey, and this is really interesting. This came to me as a middle article of much information. Time propagates bald-faced fake news. Listen to this, folks. On the cover of the latest issue of Time magazine is featuring two individuals. One's a little Honduran girl. She's crying. And looking down at her is President Donald Trump. The caption reads, "Welcome to America." Well, the clear message being sent out by this leftist magazine that this poor little girl is alone, separated from her parents because of Trump's zero-tolerance illegal immigration policy. In announcing its cover, Time tweeted, "Time's new cover, a reckoning after Trump's border separation policy. What kind of country are we?" Well, however, as we become all too common with the left media narrative, there's one massive problem with Time's cover. Listen to me, folks. That little Honduran girl was never separated from her mother. In fact, after leaving the rest of her family, her mother had paid a human trafficker $6,000 to smuggle them across the U.S. border. They were subsequently arrested by Border Patrol agents. Border Patrol agent Carlos Runes explained, quote, "We were patrolling the border. It was about 10 o'clock at night. We asked the mother to set her child down in front of her, not away from her. She was right in front of her. We wanted to be able to properly search the mother," he added. So the child immediately started crying as she was set down. I personally went up to the mother and asked her, "Are you doing okay?" "Yes," she said. The little girl, she's just tired and thirsty. You know, it's after 11 o'clock at night. Well, was the minor separated from her mother later? No. Both mother and child were detained at a family residential center in Texas. And folks, they were together. The Daily Mail tracked down Sanders' husband living in Honduras, and he explained his wife had left him and 3 other children down there to come up to America to seek a better life. Back in 2013, she was arrested and deported for illegally crossing the border. It appeared that this illegal alien had no grounds for claiming legal asylum, yet that's what she had done, and now she was seeking to break the U.S. law. This is what happens, folks. The powerful emotional image of a crying little girl offered too much potential as a tantalizing piece of propaganda to be ignored. And if the truth gets out, no matter, it's the immediate emotional impact that moves people. It's becoming common practice for the left media to package the news not to inform, but to disinform. And Times coverage is one of the most deceitful examples that we can have of this. Folks, I'm just telling you now, bringing to you different things. This is what's happening in America today. This is where we're at today. These are the people that represent us today. These riots that you're seeing on television today, tomorrow, they're happening now. This is the present tense. Homeland Security employees were warned of increased threats amid immigration uproar. The acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security warned his employees that, quote, there may be heightened threats against them. This assessment is based on specific and credible threats that have been levied against certain Department of Homeland Security employees and a sharp increase in the overall number of general threats against DHS employees. Although the veracity of such threat varies, says the message from Claire Grady, she's head of the DHS. In addition, over the last few days, thousands of employees have had their personal identifiable information publicly released on social media. The memo recommends numerous safety precautions, including not displaying their badges in public, being careful with public conversations, and using caution on all social networks. It also recommends DHS employees, quote, always keep your doors and windows locked and be aware of unexpected changes in and around your home. This are our DHS employees, folks. They're encouraged to call 911 if they feel threatened. And if local enforcement doesn't respond, they're directed to call Federal Protective Services. She points out she's eternally grateful for all the work they're doing, all the hours they're putting in. She said they're misconstruing your work in a negative way. They seek to disrupt your work to advance their own outside agenda. WikiLeaks published a database identifying more than 9,000 immigrant and custom enforcement, that's ICE, employees, this according to the Washington Post. The database included information about such employees. Additional information, job history, scraped from LinkedIn and their profile pictures and information on their educational background and the city and state that they were based in, putting them right down, folks, where all the terrorists could find them. This is happening to our DHS right now. There were protests held nationwide, folks. You've seen it on television this weekend. This is over immigration, as elected officials demanded access to the shelters where the children were being held. You know, when martial law goes into effect, we could lose America. And if we don't stop what's happening right now, this could very easily happen. Mike Adams from the Health Ranger tells us why in an emergency broadcast he noted that we could lose America if we don't stop what's happening right now. With the Supreme Court's decision to uphold President Trump's travel ban, that was a huge win for the U.S. Constitution, American for President Trump agenda. He tells us it may be already too late with the mainstream media weaponizing lies to incite the masses and more events indicating something bad, very bad, is brewing, with the increasing irrational and hostile left growing more angry and completely unhinged every day. As this news story over a Rasmussen poll report lays out flatly, 31% of Americans now believe the U.S. Civil War will be coming, and soon. 59% of those polled believe Democrats opposed to President Trump's policies will resort to violence. Should the left suddenly start carrying out their violent tempers upon law-abiding conservative Americans and conservatives respond to protect themselves and their family, it could end up being a bloodbath for the left, with Republican gun ownership in America more than 3 times that of the Democrats. That's according to a Pew Research Center poll. As we hear from Adams, much of the resistance we're witnessing in America right now is probably being led by none other than Barack Obama. And while the left under Obama has put in place everything they needed during his 8 years in office, everything to turn America into a totalitarian police state, should violence explode in this country, President Trump would soon turn that against him. Trump recently warned Democrats about the escalating confrontation and the Rex 84 martial law plans that have been created to deal with such a scenario. They were set up years ago, developed by the United States federal government to detain large numbers of American citizens deemed, quote, national security threats. In the event that happens, and the president declares a state of national emergencies, those calling for violence better watch out. They better watch out on what they may get. These are the things that are happening right now, folks. These are the things we need to consider. Someone's going to snap. Someone, something. Just now, we've got, this past week, Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy retiring. The president obviously will get another Supreme Court pick as the liberals are melting down over this. Folks, it all fits together. Over the past week, the Supreme Court handed down rulings on a number of high-profile and controversial cases where they sided with a Christian baker that would not provide a custom wedding cake to the same-sex couple due to his religious belief. The Supreme Court sided with an anti-abortion crisis pregnancy center over California, going too far to regulate him. They upheld President Trump's travel ban while asserting he held the authority in securing the nation, among other rulings to which liberal websites claimed conservatives win. This happened this past week, you know. With each conservative ruling, liberals across the internet, in forums, chats, on their websites, social media, they've rallied against the Supreme Court. They've called for it to be abolished as an institution. Get rid of ICE? Now get rid of the Supreme Court. And they've gone utterly rabid against Neil Gorsuch. That was the Trump nominee that replaced the late Justice Scalia. Folks, Justice Kennedy retired, as you know from reading this week. Within minutes of the news hitting the wires, Twitter and other social media platforms erupted with reactions to the news. Multiple hashtags started trending, with liberals demanding that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell not hold a confirmation hearing until the midterm elections. Now, they were trying to equate this with the Senate's refusal during a presidential election cycle to confirm Barack Obama's nominee. But the difference, folks, and it's not always being pointed out, that was a presidential election cycle. There's no president running. This is just for Congress. But the same people suggesting they also take this suggest to remind they don't tell the people that Obama's nominee, Justice Kagan, was confirmed in August 2010, and that was during a midterm election. But now McConnell's not supposed to do it. Well, his response to the Senate floor, where he states, quote, "The Senate stands ready to fulfill its constitutional role by offering advice and consent on President Trump's nominee to fill this vacancy. We will vote to confirm Justice Kennedy's successor this fall." A quote from Mitch McConnell. Before the latest news of Kennedy's retirement, liberals were already acting pretty unhinged, with Democratic politicians like Maxine Waters calling on public harassment and confrontation by liberal supporters against the Trump administration officials, with Hollywood celebrities threatening President Trump's 11-year-old Barron and White House Secretary Sarah Sanders' children. By the way, I just noticed today that she's being rumored to getting ready to retire. Now we see liberal writers pushing narratives to their audience like that we see about Kennedy's retirement from Think Progress, so-called justice editor, where he's already attempting to incite his readers with statements like this: Roe versus Wade will soon be a memory. Anti-discrimination laws will soon be shriveled husks. The LGBTQ rights revolution will halt, most likely begin to reverse. That march in reverse. This is what they're talking about. The Washington Post isn't much better by headlining Justice Kennedy's retirement leaves the future of U.S. constitutional law up for grabs. MSNBC's Chris Matthews is already threatening hell to pay if Democrats don't block Anthony Kennedy's replacement. Raw Stone predicted throwing gasoline on the fire with abortion will be illegal in 20 states in 18 months. Slate magazine is informing its readers the only political hope here is for massive street protests. This is what's happening in America today, folks. This is just part of it. I've got more information, could go on for hours. This is what's inciting our riots in America. This is what's bringing us to the possibility of a second civil war. This is serious stuff, folks. Stay tuned. Listen to Hannity on Fox News. Listen to Judge Jeanine on Saturday night. Pray for America, folks. Pray as you've never prayed before for the personal safety of our president and vice president.